Sometime today, before you leave, please see Chelsea over on the table. If you're a non-legislative member, she has citizen reimbursement forms. So you need to fill one of those out so that our office at the Capitol can get you paid for the meetings you attended. But again, see Chelsea before you leave today so that you can get that signed. We'll go ahead and get started. If it's all right, we're going to bow and quick prayer. Most gracious Lord, thank you for the opportunity, God, to come here to Waycross. Lord, thank you for the local leadership here, for this community, for its people, Lord. Lord, thank you for the rail industry, Lord, that has been successful in this town for many, many years. God, we pray a blessing on each one of our commission members today as they travel home after we're finished. Lord, most of all, we pray, God, that everything we do will be to lift your name in some way. Forgive us what we fail. Thank you for the many blessings. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with welcome to Waycross. We're going to ask Representative James Bichette to go up to the podium. Representative Bichette has done a good job of raising the concerns that Waycross has back to us in Atlanta and the General Assembly. He's passionate about this community he serves, and I know those here at Waycross are glad to have him and happy to have him. So, Representative, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Once again, I want to welcome you to Waycross and District 176. I appreciate the work the Commission is doing, and thank you for making a long trip down to Waycross, Georgia. I hope you enjoyed your trip to the rail yard yesterday and also to the depot last night. First and foremost, I want to say this. CSX is part of the backbone of Waycross, Georgia. It's been here for years. We understand that. We understand the economic impact it has here. We want to see CSX thrive. We want to see them grow. We want to see them do the best they can. Alternatively, we also want to be able to travel efficiently through the community. And so, just to give you a brief overview of what we have here on a daily basis, I'll give you for instance, yesterday morning, 7 a.m., school buses trying to get to school. Out here on the north portion of town, we have on US 1, we have a double track. And on that track, there were 2 trains sitting. And we have school buses on the southern side of US 1 trying to get to a school on the north side of US 1. And those children have to eat breakfast and get into their classes. Well, those children sat for 45 minutes. So they didn't have the opportunity to have breakfast, and it caused a pretty big commotion, and my phone was lighting up all morning. And so the main thing that we need, I think 2 things that we need. We need to raise the awareness, and I think the chairman are already doing that, on the funds that need to be allocated for overpasses and bypasses, particularly here in this city on US 1. We've already been working pretty hard with GDOT in putting that project forth, but any attention we can get from the chairman and everyone in Atlanta to help us get that project pushed up, so that it's not several years down the road, is what we're asking for. And that was just one example. In that same area, north of town on US 1, if a train sits there, there's a likelihood they could be blocking up to 7 crossings. And in some of those neighborhoods, there is no ingress or egress when the train is on the tracks. So that means no fire, no EMS, no police if there is any emergency. So I applaud and thank the Commission for doing this, the work they're doing, and to continue to grow the freight industry. We want to do that, but we also want to be able to travel over and around these trains. And it's a daily impact. I wish you could get some of the emails and the text messages and phone calls that I get on a daily basis. And I think everybody is being reasonable. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that CSX has been a great partner. You met Rodney Brown yesterday, and Rodney and I stay in constant contact. He's helping. Sometimes CSX cannot help these trains. They decouple. There's accidents. We understand that. I think everybody understands that. And they have been a great partner, a great community partner. We just need to grow around and over the railroads, as they grow. The second thing I wanted to mention was that with the increase in freight, one of the other projects we need to, here in Waycross, attack is a perimeter road so that our major highways, the freight coming into town doesn't have to come into downtown Waycross, because whether you believe it or not, 5 o'clock here in Waycross looks a lot like 5 o'clock in Atlanta, and it shouldn't look like that here in rural Georgia. But again, thank you for coming. Thank you for the work you're doing. I'm going to introduce Mayor Knox. He's going to come up here and give you a few words of welcome. I appreciate you, and if there's anything I can do, please reach out to me. Thank you very much.
Good job. Maybe Chairman Brown and I won't have to talk about some of the problems we have with transportation here in Waycross, since Representative Burchett took care of it for us. But on behalf of the city of Waycross, I'd like to welcome all of you to our community today. Let me ask a quick question for the committee members here. How many have been in Waycross before? Whoa. Okay, that surprises me. Quite a few more than I anticipated. But anyhow, I still want to give you a little bit of perspective about where you are today. So in case you go back to Atlanta or wherever you came from and tell people I was in Waycross and they say, where's that? Give you something you can tell them. This is a true fact. We don't have a lot to brag on in our community compared to Atlanta with 5 or 6 million people, and Hartsville, Jackson, the airport. But this is what we do have. You're now sitting in the largest town, in the largest county, in the largest state east of the Mississippi River. Now that may not be much, but it's all we got to hang our hat on, and we're sticking with it. Another thing we're kind of proud of around here, a long time ago, 100 years ago, 1910s, 1920s, Waycross was actually oftentimes referred to as the Atlanta of South Georgia. We had a couple of 6, 7-story buildings downtown, which 100 years ago for this part of the state was pretty good. Y'all outpaced us a little bit since then, but 100 years ago we were in Atlanta of South Georgia. Right here on this stage, in about June, I believe it was, of 1956, Elvis Presley performed. It was right before he went on the Ed Sullivan Show in September of that year. Well, the Elvis Presley Show, he was part of the Grand Ole Opry tour. And he performed here. It cost $1 to see him and the Carter family from the Grand Ole Opry. A couple of months later, after he went on the Ed Sullivan Show, you couldn't see him for $1 anymore. It cost a whole lot more after that. But we've had all the famous entertainers back on the wall there. You can see some plaques, and there's some on the outside of all the people who performed here. Hank Williams, Roy Acuff, Jerry Lee Lewis, Johnny Cash, Ethel Waters, James Brown performed here. Heavyweight champion Joe Louis had an exhibition boxing match right here. They had a crowd like this. They asked for volunteers, and finally one big brave guy from the railroad said he'd give it a shot. They went one round, and he said he was just real thankful it wasn't two. But anyhow, we've had some real famous people here in town in the 40s and 50s. They all came through here. It's been a little bit of a dry spell, I guess, since then until today. This might be the biggest accumulation of big-name people in the state of Georgia we've had in this town in quite a while, so we're proud to have all of you here. Thank you for the work you do. I know it's tough being in the legislature and trying to satisfy everybody's wants and desires and wishes with limited resources to do it with. But we appreciate the job you're doing. We're glad to have you here in Waycross. This time it's my pleasure to introduce my friend, the chairman of the Ware County Commission, Jimmy Brown. He'll come and bring you some remarks. Thank you for being here.
I don't know what I can say. The mayor First of all, let me say on behalf of the Wake County Board of Commissioners, we welcome you here to Waycross. It's good to see our folks from Atlanta come to Waycross. You in a historical building, believe me. I was born and raised here, and been in this government just about all my life. Next year will be 52 years. So I know about Ware County and Waycross. We have a good working relationship with the city, and our partnership with CSX has been wonderful. We appreciate it. They've heard me say this several times. We appreciate the jobs that they provide for our community. Something like 1,300, that could be a little less or a little more, I don't know. But we appreciate that. And we have many, many more transportation industry in Waycross. We have a brand new FedEx facility that just opened up a couple, 2 or 3 months ago. But anyhow, to Mr. Kevin Tanner, we ask to thank you for putting this meeting together, and our representative, we thank him so much for his interest in resolving. This is a problem, as the mayor said, and it's been a problem. It started last year, last month. It's been a problem for years and years and years. CSX, ACL came to Waycross in 1850. That's how long the railroad's been here. It's the backbone of this community. And I've said to so many people, and I've had so many people say to me, well, if we didn't have the railroad here, this would be a ghost town. It would be a big old hole punched in it if it wasn't here. And we appreciate CSX being here. We appreciate their leadership. They always come, they always interested, they always listen, and they do what they can. We're working together. We got some issues that we're going to resolve them, like the overpass on this area we'll resolve. We got a couple of projects over there building. So it's going to take time. You don't build an overpass overnight, and you don't build bypass roads overnight. So we do appreciate the opportunity, you folks coming from Atlanta. And I'm going to add just a little bit to what the mayor said. Ware County is the largest county east of the Mississippi in any state, 906 square miles. And I had the opportunity to ask the Speaker of the House, whenever he brought all the senators and representatives from Macon, Mid-County north, it came, and there was probably 75 or 100 head in this, and sitting right here as we're sitting today, and I gave them a $64,000 question. I asked them, I said, anybody in here can tell me how big this county is? Raise your hand. I said, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to think about it. I kept talking. At the end, I said, now, can anybody tell me? Raise your hand. 0 people. I said, now, I'm going to pass this on to you. Waycross, the state line don't end at Macon, Bibb County. It ends at the Baker County, Ware County line, which is about another 120 or 30 miles. So we'd like to see you folks, North Georgia, come to Waycross and see what we're all about. And we thank y'all for coming today. I'm going to introduce our manager, Mr. Scott Moy. Before I do, Commissioner Burton Carter from District 5, I want to recognize him. He's here today. I don't think many of the rest of our commissioners paid him. Thank you for coming, Mr. Carter. Scott Moy, our Ware County manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As he was saying, and just more or less to echo the remarks that was made previously, to kind of give you an idea of what's going on here locally in Waycross and Ware County. If you took a look at an aerial map of our area, Waycross, Ware County, we are a regional hub for the counties that outline Ware County. You got roughly 8 county Ware County. The state highways, you have 82, you have 84, you have US 1. It's all dissected. Take a look at an aerial map of Waycross, and then on top of that, pull up and look at your railroad lines. The city and the county is dissected in that fashion. And one of the needs that we have here locally in Southeast Georgia, now keep in mind you're in Southeast Georgia, you're very close to all the ports, not just Savannah. You've got Brunswick, And you've also got to consider Florida. We're only just a few miles from the Florida state line. So if you think about the freight that's coming out of Florida and coming through, in many cases, I have a lot of friends and family who are truck drivers that tell me on a constant basis that they do not like driving on interstates. And the reason why is because of accidents and the crowd and the traffic. The volume of traffic slows them down. Just like, around the Atlanta metro area, you have a wreck, you could sit on the interstate in one spot for 30 minutes. And so what they try to do is they utilize state highway networks because they can get through. If there's an accident, it's usually cleaned up pretty quick. They can get by quickly. So that's one of the things I would emphasize is think about the state highway network, especially in our area with us being close to the ports and being close to Florida. I know that right now that we have many projects going on in the state highway network. We've got a scoping going on with the US 1 overpass, with the railroads that we have here, the railroad lines, and that we know that for us to be able to increase our economic opportunity, we've got to go into the overpass building business. Waycross and Ware County does, to be able to move trucks because of the state highway network system, along with the presence of CSX in Waycross. So from the standpoint from a managerial standpoint, from an operations standpoint, and from the economic opportunity standpoint, I would urge the state to think about those issues, not only in southeast Georgia, but in South Georgia. If you want to grow Georgia, you cannot ignore South Georgia, especially where we are at this point now with the ports growing like they're growing. We're seeing a lot more truck traffic. Just last night when we left here, I was headed out US 1. I believe I counted roughly about 6 or 7 semi trucks coming down US 1 that were stopped on US 1 because of the train because of the yard, trains coming in, coming out. And so they were stopped there and backed up for quite a ways. So from the standpoint of where we are here locally and what's going on with us locally, I would urge the committee to look at those aspects of South Georgia, Waycross, Southeast Georgia with the port growth, because we have to share this turf together. Truck traffic along with freight, railroad freight. So anyway, I don't want to take too much of your time. I appreciate you being here. From behalf of the Ware County Board of Commissioners, we're glad that you're here, and if I can answer any questions or help in any way, please let me know. Thank you.
I do have one question. Some of the other members might. I've heard several folks mention US 1, the interchange for the overpass. Would you consider that as your number one issue, number one priority from a transportation perspective, from a freight logistics perspective? Is that overpass?
Yes. Not only that, but beyond that too, it is a public safety issue too, because it cuts off the north part of the county from the southern part. And right now it is number one for us right now to get that up and get it moving. But we also have other issues too that we'd like to face, primarily with a perimeter road now that we're having designed. We just got the preliminary memo from it, and we're moving in that fashion too.
One of the things that we've heard as we've traveled the state, and I think we've heard this since we've been in Waycross, is we're going to continue to see an increase in freight, which is a positive thing. We want to find ways to increase the amount of freight coming into Georgia and the ports, but we also have to recognize that brings with it a set of issues and challenges in certain parts of the state, which is going to cost dollars to fix that infrastructure problem. So I'm assuming you probably got a great relationship with your GDOT district engineer here in this area. And I know the commissioner will be here shortly, but he's got a very solid freight logistics plan, and I'm pretty confident that it includes that overpass. I think one of the challenges we're going to have moving into next year is where do we find dollars to be able to help communities like yours. So I think it's important. I appreciate the way you all presented it. It's not CSX's issue. It's not
Waycross and Ware County, and we treat it as such.
Any questions?
I do have a question, if you don't mind. Thanks, Scott. So it's my understanding that your recent SPLOST failed, but that you are unique and that you've got, or somewhat unique in that you're the one community that actually is in a Transportation Investment Act region, and you have a T-SPLOST, a single county T-SPLOST. Of the monies that you're anticipating for both of those transportation-related taxes, are you putting a large portion of those into things like grade separation and overpasses? How much of that is dedicated towards the railroad, truck, and traffic problem?
Out of our single county T-SPLOST, we have a combination from the city's part and the county's part of a total of $10 million to go into that to fast track that if we can. It was something we did at the very beginning because we know that was number one priority, and both commissions made the commitment to put the money there to make sure that gets done. Yes, sir.
Just as a follow-up, how much does that move the needle? I mean, how much does $10 million pay for in terms of, will it pay for one flyover of one crossing, or is it just not even enough to do one?
The one that's being scoped right now, estimates range anywhere between $40 to $50 million just in that one. We're trying to work out some of the elements of the plan to hopefully reduce that cost and to speed up the process. Yeah, it's roughly probably 1/4 of what's needed at this point from what we've been told estimate-wise, but we really won't know in probably until the next 60 to 90 days.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you again for being here. Thank you. Again, thank you for your hospitality. Waycross and Ware counties made us feel very welcome both yesterday, last night, and today. So thank you. All right, next up we've got Matt Campbell talking about smart transportation division, talking about safe rail operations.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Beach and Chairman Tanner. You guys not only do a great job with this commission, but in your respective districts and for the state, wonderful job. Thank you, members of the commission, for giving me the opportunity to speak this morning. And please forgive me if I look a little tired. I stayed at a nice resort about 15 miles from here, and they had a sick pig, so I was up to about midnight listening to a pig squeal and watching an old country boy give a pig a shot. And we don't see that much in Atlanta, so I'm a little under the weather this morning, but it was a fun time, and I learned a lot about the swine business. Matt Campbell, Smart Transportation Division. We're a labor union of railroad workers, many across the state, many right over here in Rice Yard. I myself was a train conductor out of Savannah, came in and out of Rice Yard many times. Used to come out here as a boy. My daddy worked out of Rice Yard. Very familiar with the area. If you went on the tour yesterday, I hope you went through the tunnel. I always enjoyed doing that with the locomotive. You bring the train in those tracks that you saw by the big hump, and you cut your locomotives off, and you take the locomotives to the diesel shop where they could get fueled and fixed and ready to go for the next run. And you kind of felt like Thomas the Train when you got to go through that tunnel. It was really cool. So hope you enjoyed that. Glad you're here. Glad CSX is here. The railroad is a wonderful industry. And it's even better when it's running right and it's running safe. And the message I have for you today ties in a little bit about what we've heard, safe rail operations. Block crossing ties into that, but there's some other stuff. And why does safe rail operations, why does it matter to your community? Why does it matter to Rice Yard, Atlanta, Savannah, Columbus? We haul some dangerous stuff. We haul dangerous chemicals. And if they're not hauled properly, if they're not hauled with care, if they're not hauled professionally, if mechanisms are not put in place, they can be very dangerous. You've got chlorine, anhydrous ammonia, ethanol, gasoline, hydrochloric acid, sulfuric acid. Just last month, President Trump's committee approved hauling LNG, liquefied natural gas. That's pretty explosive. Needs to be handled with care. The men and women who drive the trains want to haul it. We'll haul anything. We won't work. You know, and we want to haul it properly and safely through your towns, because it's a lot safer on rail than it is in truck. No question about that. And so we're prepared to do it, but communities need to be aware of what's in store. Next thing, when you go to block crossing, what we heard about earlier is, you know, kids not getting to school. You know, what about ambulances? I think there was a death in the area not long ago where an ambulance was blocked by a train. That's unacceptable. That's a process failure from the top to the bottom. Part of the reasons why there's so many more block crossings now than there was a few years ago is because of the increase in train length. I mean, there's several steps. I'm not going to go through them all. I'm not going to harp too much. But what I'm going to tell you is a longer train is harder to operate. Historically, trains have been about 7,500 feet. Now, we've heard in the commission meeting in Savannah, the goal is about 10,000 feet. That's really too long. Most sidings aren't even 10,000 feet. 12,000 feet, 15,000 feet is entirely too long. But that's what we're seeing. So the longer a train is, the harder it is to operate. So when you've got a train that's 2 miles long, 10,000 feet, and you've got a locomotive on one end, and you've got a train of 150 cars, and you've got hills, that train's going up and down. The bottom that's 2 miles away might be in a valley. You're on a hill with a bunch in between. You got loads in it, you got shifting product, right? They rip apart. When a train rips apart, it stops. Brake, shoot. You can't help where it stops. It could be blocking all 7 crossings in the town. It could be shutting down the world. It's not good. And so that's part of the problem. Are longer trains necessary? That's somebody else's argument, not mine. I'm just telling you the facts. They're harder to operate. You see more block crossings with them all the way around. Time for a forced stop is longer, because think about that. To get it repaired, you got further to go, you got further to get back to the head. This picture is Perry, Georgia. It's a Norfolk Southern train derailed on October 10th. An auto rack train, and it had what they call distributed power, which is an extra locomotive in the train because it's so long that you throw an extra locomotive in there to help run that train, right? Distributed power or extra engines are used up in the mountains and stuff like that to help you push up a hill. Now trains are getting so longer, you're sticking them on the end of the train or in the middle of the train. That takes preparation, that takes training, right? If you're a locomotive engineer and you've never operated one of these things, or you might have read it in a pamphlet, how to do it, and you get thrown out there, it can be dangerous. This derailment hit a gas line. Thankfully, they're in the woods, in the rural community, in a nearby Purdue chicken plant. The employees were nearby, but they were kept inside till the gas was contained, so nobody was injured. But, you know, thank God that wasn't US 1 or you know, downtown Atlanta or Macon, Georgia, right? I mean, that kind of stuff is real. It can happen. You know, why is all this happening? Yes, there's more freight. Yes, you know, and that's a good thing. That's a great thing. That's what this commission's about. How do we handle it? Part of why it's happening is this fad that's come in called precision scheduled railroading. This isn't unique to Waycross or Georgia. It's going across the country. I'm coming up on my 20th year in the railroad industry. And in the past 2 years, I've seen more changes than I have for 20 years. Those changes have not been good. Longer trains, doing more with less. That's kind of the key to this precision scheduled railroad. I don't know if you went in the tower yesterday at Rice Yard. I don't know how many people you saw up there. 1, 2, 3. doing more with less. Every step of the way, cutting cost. That makes sense to some, but it could put your community in jeopardy when you're cutting costs. Doubling the size of trains, all that adds together. Job cuts from the top to the bottom, not just the labor force, but management force. Norfolk Southern predicts to cut 3,000 jobs by 2021 because of this precision schedule railroad. CSX, since implementing it, has cut 22% of their maintenance workers, 16% of train crews, that's your conductors and engineers, 11% of its maintenance way employees. That was when I pulled these numbers, probably more now. So you have more freight, but you're doing it with less people, and the less people are having to do more tasks. It could be unsafe, just letting you know. Precision schedule railroading, one of the key things you hear about is these longer trains. You gotta have longer trains, that's the way to get trains over the road. Like I said before, that is a nightmare for communities. It's an unnecessary burden. You saw the locomotives in the yard yesterday. They weren't sitting there because they were out of gas. Those could be hooked up to cars and pulling all this freight. What you're also seeing is rail yard closures. And I hope and pray it doesn't come to Rice Yard or anywhere else. Just last month, the Union Pacific, the biggest railroad in the country, closed Neff Yard in Kansas City, Missouri, with a few days' notice. What's happening there is what we do not want to happen in Rice Yard. It can cripple a community. Think about the local economy. You got all these good paying jobs, several 100,000 jobs, good upper middle class incomes, going in the blink of an eye because of a model railroad plan that is yet to see any proven results. In Congress, they're hearing stuff all the time from the shippers who rely on the railroad to ship their product. They're not happy. They're not happy at all. They're fed up. Some people in here may be rail shippers, and you get what I'm talking about. So what can you do? Hopefully we can get some overpasses. Maybe we can get some tunnels if the trains are going to keep getting longer. There's a couple of things you can do today that won't solve the problem, but it can help mitigate it. Is you can call your congressman or your state rep, state senator, and ask them to keep 2 people on the crew. Because there's an effort to take the conductor off the freight train. So on that long train, it's 10,000 feet, 15,000 feet, you got an engineer and a conductor coming through your town, 4 sets of eyes, 2 sets of eyes, 4 eyes. You got somebody that if you do block a crossing, he or she can get down and separate that train and let traffic through, be it an ambulance or a school bus. It's not even being done good now. You're still having to wait forever now. Imagine if you got one person up there that can't even get out of the seat. There's a bill in Congress called H.R. 1748, the Rail Safe Freight Act. It's got about 123 co-sponsors on it. That's for a national law. There's a bill in the State House. Representative Rick Williams has it from Milledgeville, Georgia, HB 190. It's a rail safety bill. Same thing on a state level. This law is passed in some other states. Colorado, Nevada. The Federal Railroad Administration has come out and said that states should not regulate that. So now those states are in court with the FRA, basically to say, we're a state, we can protect our citizens if we want to. We can be proactive. We don't need the feds. The feds can't even handle their own business. You know, why should they handle Georgia's business? Georgia has the right by law to do it. And from a guy who's been up there on a train, dug through rubble, seen disaster, I think we ought to do it. It's not going to prevent every accident. It's not going to clear up every crossing. But if you think it's bad now, it's only going to get worse. And that tunnel or that overpass construction hadn't started yet. Another thing, there's a bill in the State House, HB 375, Representative Joseph Douglas, penalties for block crossings. You know, doing more with less, you know, every business looks at that. You know, McDonald's and Chick-fil-A looks at how many napkins they give you. That makes sense. You know, I mean, everything costs. And the goal is to make money. Nobody's refuting that. We need to make money. I'm a shareholder. You know, let's make the money. But you can do it with less headache for everybody involved. And if the goal is to make money, then the only way somebody's going to listen is what? You hurt their pocketbook. So maybe a penalty for keeping a crossing block for an excessive amount of time, for causing a kid not to be able to get to school, or causing an ambulance not to be able to get to the hospital, making somebody pay a little bit of money, maybe they put a better process in to get the daggone crossing unblocked. On a brighter note, the railroad is a wonderful industry. The more freight that comes into Savannah is great, and I'm so thankful that we have CSX, Norfolk Southern, and some all-star short lines in the state of Georgia. They do a tremendous job. And what they're handed, but with the process, the way things are going across the company-wide and across the country, you can't really help that. You have to do, you have to play the hand you're dealt. And the guys and gals in railroading in Georgia do a tremendous job. We haul freight, they say we haul America. It's real and it happens, and the one thing we really need to think about is as we continue to grow, as Georgia grows, as Freight Commission pushes forward, I ask you to consider, and I hope you will think about, it's not just about the dollars, it's about what makes common sense for the community. Think about the safety, because trains, trucks too, but trains run right by schools, right through towns. They're long, they're heavy, and we carry dangerous stuff. So any effort to increase freight or look at ways to make freight, make sure safety is a bullet point. It matters. Communities matter. Whether it's a truck on the highway, train on the tracks, it needs to be done safely by qualified people. So I'm Matt. I'm happy to answer any questions, or if you want to chat later, we can talk. Thank you for your time. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned long train being 10,000, 50,000 feet, is that what you said? So what is a not long train, or average?
Well, historically average about 7,500 feet. So you think across, so you have a railroad track, right? What they call the main line, the track that comes into Rice Yard. The main line that goes from, say, Waycross to Jacksonville. That's one line, right? And you have a siding track. The siding is where if two trains meet, one of them takes the siding, pulls over, lets the other one go by. Most sidings are no longer than 9,000 feet. So historically, because of operating, what locomotives can pull and all that, and being able to pull over and let another train by, 9,000 feet was really a long train. Normally trains been about 7,500 feet, 8,000 feet.
Matt, I'm just curious, you referred to the FRA and probably state legislatures that are dealing with these matters. Where do you think that's going to end up? From what I heard, is the FRA at least says it's going to get jurisdiction on this matter. And I'm sure other state legislators don't agree with that. Where do you think that's finally going to head, or is it going to go into the courts?
It's in the courts, so the Ninth Circuit, I'm not familiar with all the Ninth District, Ninth Circuit Court, Washington, Nevada, Colorado, I believe, maybe another state, I think there's 4 states, have taken it to court saying the states have the right to implement our own safety laws. In other words, if the feds don't already have a law in place, the states can implement a law. Or if the feds have a law in place and the states want to take it a step further, they have the right to do that.
So that's an issue that will get resolved somehow.
It'll resolve somehow.
Yeah, thank you.
Matt, thank you for being here. I was confused when I first started listening to you, because you sounded like you were criticizing the railroad. I thought you worked for the railroad, but it sounds like it's sort of a labor grievance that you're having. But I'm not sure what HB 19 and HB 375 have to do with what the purpose of this commission is here for. We're trying to figure out a way to help get freight through Georgia quicker and safer. And I get the part about the road crossings being a frustration for people, but are you representing the unions today, or are you here to represent the railroad industry as a whole?
I'm representing the railroad workers who are driving these 10,000-foot long trains. Okay. And those two bills are a vital part of hauling rail safety. And so I didn't communicate it clearly enough. But those bills would minimize what you see. So if you think it's bad now with these longer trains and block crossings, if states don't act in the interest of safety and allow the railroads to remove a person from the cab of that locomotive, then it's just going to get worse. That's all I meant by that.
Is this part of, going back to the senators, is this part of our purview that we need to dig into this today? Or is it Senate issues or labor issues or legal issues in the courts? And so much time that we want to question the innocence of these issues today.
Well, that's really a, well, maybe I'll answer. Yeah.
Keeping it sustained. No, I think it's up to the commission. If you want to continue to ask questions, we can do that. We can move forward. I think that what hearing from the communities is important because of just a real impact on local communities across Georgia. We need to put dollars in some of these issues. I think the longer the trains get, we're going to have block crossing issues, which is a state issue we need to address with overpasses, et cetera. But it's really up to the commission. If you continue to ask questions, we'll continue the conversation. If not, we'll move forward. All right. Thanks, ma'am.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Craig Russo and Eric Henderson from CSX. Y'all ready? Come talk to us a little bit about railroad future report.
Good morning. My name is Craig Canuso. I'm the Regional Vice President for State Government Affairs for CSX. I'm based out of Atlanta, Georgia. With me is Eric Hendrickson. Eric is our Director of Network Planning for CSX. He's held positions previously in network operations as well as process improvement. He was a superintendent of train operations in Illinois as well as a chief train dispatcher. He's had an illustrious career that has included stints with Amtrak, as well as the Canadian Pacific Railway, and altogether has been in the industry for 24 years. So Eric and I are here today to talk a little bit about the railroads, where we are here in Georgia, as well as beyond. I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about the state industry. Obviously, we're in Waycross. I think we've heard a little bit about CSX this morning. But there's also another major Class 1, Norfolk Southern Railroad, here in Georgia, as well as 28 short line railroads. And we have representatives today with Norfolk Southern, Connor Poe, who I believe all you know. Lynn Middleton represents the Georgia Railroad Association. Ed Lindsay represents Omnitrax. And Linda Hamrick is here with represents the G&W Railroad. So when you talk about railroads in Georgia, employment, 7th largest employment state for railroads in the nation, number 1 in the Southeast. Wages, about $540 million paid in the railroad, number 1 in the Southeast, 7th nationally. Carloads that originate in the state, 5th nationally, number 1 in the Southeast. Carloads that terminate, currently it's 4th. Personally, I believe that's going to increase, but number 1 in the Southeast. Waycross, for those of you who were unable to attend the tour yesterday, CSX has about 900 employees, but that doesn't count the number of retirees that live in the region. It doesn't count. It is rare that, for those of you that were at dinner last night, and the head of the Waycross Downtown Authority talking about him coming from a railroad family, it is rare that you will talk to anybody here in the city of Waycross that is not supported by CSX. CSX is very important to the city of Waycross, and also Waycross is very, very important to CSX. We're proud to be here. Total salaries here total of about $62 million of gross salary. And that's a lot to the economy. For those of you that were here last night at the dinner, I counted 7 trains that came by the depot. You heard Rodney yesterday talk about 3,000 cars daily that are processed here. There's an awful lot of traffic that moves through here. Anywhere between 40 and 50 trains a day that come through here. That's a lot of commerce that moves through to Waycross. And with that, it certainly comes issues. Certainly issues. We are on record, and we absolutely support the overpass at US 1. We've written letters to then Transportation Planner Roberts, who I know joined us a little bit later, and we continue and more than happy to work with Representative Burchett as well as the Commissioner and the Mayor and the incoming Mayor as they continue to push that. I certainly hope as we move forward and try to figure out solutions to all freight and logistics in the state, that US 1 is something that's at the top of that list. In terms of trains, I did hear the number 15,000 feet. As Rodney mentioned yesterday, we don't run a train that's longer than 12,000 feet, which certainly is absolutely long, but and just distributed power. I won't get into that from the slide that was shown. But technology in the railroad is changing, just like technology in a lot of industries is changing. And what we seek to do is how can we move things efficiently? How can we move things safely? I will tell you, and I say this with a grin, one thing that you will find from the previous speaker and me right now that we do have in common, Matt had a great tie, and that tie is also reflected on the very same button that I have, and it's to promote railroad safety. Safety is of paramount importance to all of us. So there's a lot that goes on in the industry, and what I'd like to do is call on Eric, who does have a PowerPoint slide, and then what I'll do, Chairman, is come back and talk about what some other states are doing from a funding standpoint and how we believe it can certainly help here in Georgia. So Eric. Oh, is there? Okay.
Hey everybody, I'm Eric Hendrickson, Director of Network Planning for CSX. Before we get started, I will tell you I am from Wisconsin. I do have an accent, so if I say something, please ask me. Man, it gets hot down here, I can only tell you that. It's crazy. I live down in Jacksonville, I can't deal with the heat. I'm a snowmobiler, I miss the snow in a sick way. Anyway, real quick before we get started, I want you to notice this photo right here. That locomotive is one of 3 that we have, our Pride and Service locomotives, and those are my babies because I designed that program. This photo was actually taken here in Waycross because we base those locomotives here because that's how important this town is to us. It's central so we can shoot them out to anywhere we want, but we did a photo shoot down here for some publicity stuff in the state of Georgia. The city of Waycross came over and we had the state troopers come down and we did some photos. This is 2 of your officers who were fantastic, and they were like little kids around these locomotives. It was terrific. So our network is the largest of the eastern carriers on the eastern seaboard, and basically, if you want to think about it, it's from the Mississippi River east. Our density in traffic, of course, it varies by route. We are very much a hub and spoke type network. You're only as good as your network. The bigger you are, the better you can serve your customers and their needs. And there's different reasons why we do different things in terms of how our network works and flows. Our biggest network actually is, I think this is a laser printer. Our highest capacity corridor is what we call the water level route from Chicago to Jersey and Boston. Quite a few trains there a day. Its main competitor is I-90. So think about I-90 goes from Chicago to Boston. That's what we're doing. We're taking those loads off the interstate, and we've got a high capacity. That's why these lines are darker, because that's the amount of gross ton miles that we're running on that route. Our next biggest one, which I'll speak to at length, is our growing corridor, what we call the southeast corridor. This is the former L&N and CNEI parts of the railroad and ACL that come right through here in Waycross. Our next one is the I-95 corridor, which is where we started, is basically Boston, Jersey, Richmond, DC, Baltimore, down through Rocky Mount, part of Waycross, down into Florida and back off to the West Coast. We have major interchange points with all the western carriers along our western part of the network. So if you think about it, the America works and the people go where they want to go for the most part because we're a free nation. But your consumption and production is dependent on how your network is. So the highways, the railroads all feed into that. So a lot of cases where the South is growing with population, whether it be an import from China or what have you, or where it's manufactured, say on an automobile up in Michigan, that's where the stuff is flowing. It's either flowing in from the ports or from the West Coast, from the LA, Spokane, and it comes down and into our network. We're essentially a west to east network. We have more loads that go west to east than we do going back west. So in some ways it's an imbalance of the network, but that's how it's just the way it is, because that's where your consumption market is. Waycross is considered a very, very strategic part of what we call the triangle. So, let me get this to work here. Here you go. That's, like I said, we got the I-90 corridor, the I-95 corridor, and then our Southeast Expressway. But Waycross sits at basically the tip of the south part of the triangle. That's how important this hub is actually to our network. Hence the volume you see here, 25 to 3,000 cars a day that we're processing here to go various parts of the country. So we have key corridors, and of course they drive growth. Right now we're really focusing on the triangle quite a bit. And then the heart of CSX, a lot of it in here is coal country, the coal fields. West Virginia, Kentucky, and whatnot. And of course, everybody knows what's going on with coal. It's transitioning, the marketplace is changing there. But we still have a pretty extensive network up here of customers. Cincinnati, for example, a lot of industrial manufacturing and different products that are coming out of that network. Not that we ignore it, it's a little bit less volume than you have out here. We have quite a bit of a network up here, especially the clinch field coming down from the coal fields. We purposely redeploy capital to drive growth and margin expansion. Right now, as I'll talk about more, on our Southeast Gateway, I don't want to use the term struggling, but we are trying to keep up with growth. A lot of the population's coming down here, and hey, I gripe about the heat, but I get it. I don't have salt in my car in January that I gotta wash off every other day. It's weird to mow your lawn on Christmas Eve, but I can deal with it. So we try to focus on our growth. This route, this L&N route that came from Chicago down to here, historically was undercapitalized with our previous road. The L&N was known for short, frequent trains. So their train length size was really, really short. So they built their network based on that because they had a lot of passenger service and whatnot. So we've had to spend a ton of money on that network to be able to build it into the modern railroad that we have now, and we continue to in the future because it just needs it because of the growth. You have the Birminghams, the Nashville of the world. I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever been to Nashville recently, but I mean, just look at the cranes that are building up in that town. It's consumption there, so you have a lot of business that wants to go there. Well, it's tough when you've got a lot of sidings or double mains that can't handle that product. So that's a big focus of what I do during my normal duties, is trying to strategery, as I call it, look out and see where we're going to grow, where can I put a second main, where can I extend a siding, where can I do different things to make our network faster. So you can see the northern corridor where it's showing that volume, 86% of it's double track. Essentially, we're double track all the way from Selkirk, which is Albany, New York, all the way to Chicago. We have a small little section in Cleveland that's not even a half a mile long. And then you have the river line, and then the B&A would go over to Boston, that's all single lane. And part of that is the way it was. The river line you follow the Hudson River, so there's not a lot of places you can put a second main and whatnot. The B&A, you're going through a mountain up there. It's tough to put a second main here. The I-95 corridor, it's about half double track, moderate velocity. The biggest challenge over in that network is the passenger service, especially to Baltimore, to DC area, Jersey. You deal with a lot of passenger. R&B is a good example, from Richmond to Baltimore, where you're struggling for capacity because you have to run so many MARC and VRE type trains. So in a lot of that area, it's double, triple, quadruple track spots that we can handle what we need to. The southeast corridor, as I mentioned, and you notice we kind of consider Detroit and Toledo down through Cincinnati to Nashville, Louisville, as part of that. It's only about 26% double tracked. It's velocity constrained, as we call it. Okay, I'll let you in on a secret. When I was in high school, we had a math program, or a math teacher that had the classic thing. Train A leaves at point A, train B leaves at this time, where are they gonna meet at? I was probably sleeping during that class. That's what I do for a living now, unfortunately. So a lot of what I have to do during the day is lead a team of people to model it and show where we need capacity. And with the data that we can get nowadays, the old ways of doing it was really, really labor intensive. It was pencil and paper, a lot of it. Now we have so much data that's pumping through either locomotives or waypoints or the dispatching system. We can take a lot of that and compress it down. It still takes a lot of time, not as much as before, but we can compress it down and show what we call as hot spots. Spots that we know that are consistently being used or being capacity constrained, like Nashville's a big X in our network. There's a ton of trains coming through there. So how can we add capacity to make things faster and get them through town there? The Fitzgerald sub, as we'll talk about here in a second, is our infamous sub running from Waycross right here up to Manchester, Georgia. That's one of the highest growth subdivisions we have on our network. And over the last 10 years alone, we've spent a ton of money on it, and we still got to spend more on it. In fact, I'm working on a couple spots right now that we're going to probably put some capacity into. You can see in the state of Georgia, we don't have as extensive a network as our friends at Norfolk Southern, but we're up there. We have the Augusta, the Georgia Road as we call it, Augusta to Atlanta, our Monroe sub from Atlanta over towards South Carolina, North Carolina. We have the main core of the network coming down from Chattanooga, what we call the W&A sub. This is where the infamous locomotive chase was years ago during the Civil War. You ever hit a little history buff? We have the route coming down from Etowah, Tennessee, from the coal fields that feed into the south. And then you have our main hotspot right here is the Manchester, which comes into here, and then the Fitzgerald sub, which feeds into Waycross. We have the bow line, as we call it, that goes over towards Montgomery, Birmingham, and eventually New Orleans. And then the I-95 corridor, Savannah to Waycross. This little spot here between Folkestone, Georgia, and Jacksonville is one of the highest volume locations that we have on CSX, 75 to 80 trains a day, depending on what day of the week is, because the traffic ebbs and flows. And a majority of those flow, they split at Folkestone and either go up to Savannah or they come up through Waycross. A majority of them come up through Waycross, hence all the business through here. But CSX has got a pretty big stronghold, and it's only getting stronger here in Atlanta, or in Georgia. And we're going to be adding a lot of capacity over the next 10 to 15 years in this routing right here. And even some up towards this way, towards Atlanta, which is good. I mean, it keeps me working and wondering why I was sleeping in math class. So here's a good idea of some of the infrastructure that we put in. Remember, I showed you this earlier, the different capacities for the different routes. The red spots, as you can see, where we're spending a ton of money to try and improve capacity on these different routes. We just opened up a big segment, a double track outside of Manchester, Georgia. I drummed that up here 3 years ago, and we just cut it in the last phase of it late last year. And Manchester's a crew change spot, so we have every train comes through there has to get a new crew, and we were capacity constrained on either side of it, trying to get trains in there, swap out crews, and then hold the trains. And what we did is add a second main in some of that area so that we can not only change a crew, but we can keep other trains going through and what have you. The Fitzgerald sub here, like I say, is capacity constrained. It's just the way the railroad was built at the time. And the modern railroad is again, production consumption. Everybody wanted to come down to the south, so we had to keep up with the growth. And honestly, we didn't keep up with the growth because it's grown so good. It's a good problem to have. But we've had to really take a hard look at it and see what else we can add to it in this area. So I think that's it for me.
So questions? So a couple of things that Eric touched on that I want to kind of elaborate upon. Number one, we talk about population growth. I mean, by projections that we see, population in Georgia and Florida is going to exceed the population of New York and New Jersey here within the next probably 10 years. People are continuing to move here. They continue to need the products that are moved by the railroad, and hence the capacity. When Eric talked about the north part of the network versus the southern part of the network, we talked about triple track, quadruple track. Here in Georgia, not only us, but Norfolk Southern, as well as the short lines, have it's a lot of single track, which does lead to a lot of challenges for us to try to keep up with the growth that we have. And those where we don't have single tracks and do have doubled and have passing sidings, it's an art to make sure that you try to meet those trains at the right time so the crossings are not blocked. Sometimes that's not always the case. Sometimes we have crews that time out and whatnot, and that leads to some others. But what we are really looking at doing is where can we expand those sidings. Now, one other thing Eric touched on is the fact that he talked about the money that we spend, the amount of money that we spend. Between Norfolk Southern and CSX, we are spending ourselves over $200 million a year in Georgia, and that's just to keep the trains running. That's not necessarily for new capacity. That's in tie work and bridge repair and other things very similar to the roads and the amount of money the DOT has to spend thanks to House Bill 170 just to keep the roads here in the state good and able for all those people that are here to move. We're the most capital-intensive industry in the nation. So about 18 cents out of every dollar that we make goes directly back into our own network. So how do we look at funding, and how does that be addressed through this commission? Got a couple of suggestions, and what I'd like to also talk about is what is going on in North Carolina and Virginia with their DOTs and how they address, how those states address rail funding. Number one, a couple of years ago, we had Senate Bill 89. Senate Bill 89 would have created a line item in the DOT's budget, not funded, but a line item in the budget that would provide for freight rail funding. And then from that point, it would be up to the railroads to prove a public benefit so that funding could be appropriated by the legislature. Unfortunately, that bill fell just short on the last night of the session. We would love to enter into discussion about that. I think from a long-term standpoint, being able to have a line item in DOT budget would at least keep that on the minds of legislators and public policy makers and give us the opportunity. Now there is a challenge there in that bill. That bill, of course, we have the gratuity clause in the state that prohibits public funds being put into private entities. Norfolk Southern, over the last couple of years, has entered into agreements with various development authorities to try to extend sidings, primarily to help with the massive amount of product that we have coming out of the ports. But it's a very cumbersome process. It is a very cumbersome process. What happens is the money is given appropriated to the development authority, then used by Norfolk Southern, but the siding is actually owned officially by the authority. It can get kind of muddy. But they have been successful with a couple of passings, right, Connor? A couple here, mostly in the southeastern part of the state, again, to help with the port. Another way, too, is because of the amount of money that is needed by the railroads to continue to invest, is we are one of the few states here that still charges a sales and use tax for locomotive fuel, diesel fuel used in locomotives. And we do have a bill that's pending before the Ways and Means Committee. It's sponsored by Representative Vance Smith. And what that would do is allow, we truly believe, a state tax, not the local tax, Tom, but it would allow that money, which goes currently into the general fund, let us have that money back. We think we can know how to spend that money and invest that directly back into our network. And we also think that between us and Norfolk Southern and the short lines, that we can more than prove that that money that is saved goes directly back into the Georgia network, as opposed to, as Eric had mentioned, we have a pretty vast, we operate in a lot of states. We know that's a challenge. We know that for a host of political reasons, that bill is a challenge, but it is something that we wanted to put out before this commission. Now, the Georgia DOT, the Intermodal Department, which is led by Carol Comer, is fantastic. Carol Comer does a fantastic job, as does Commissioner McMurray. We've got a great relationship with him. I think all of our short line partners, Norfolk Southern as well as CSX, enjoy that, and we really think they do a wonderful job. But when you look at the comparisons to North Carolina and Virginia, in terms of the amount of money that the states appropriate, the amount of staff that these DOTs have, you kind of look at Georgia and go, whoa. And as an example, in North Carolina, 45 employees in their rail division, 45. They have 4 branches in their rail division: planning and development, engineering design, construction, and operations and facilities. They have a funding through a freight rail and rail crossing safety improvement fund that was established in 2013 to help improve freight rail service. It's funded primarily through a dividend that is paid by the North Carolina Railroad, which is actually owned by the state. The state of North Carolina operates that railroad. And for the record, the state of Georgia owns 500 miles of railroad here in Georgia. But that's an appropriation of about $3.75 million a year. Other funding that happens in, the legislature also contributes to that fund. It goes to fund grade separation studies. So we're talking about US 1. I mean, there's something right there. Alternative access and removing grade crossings. And what the state of North Carolina has done, and we talk about efficiency. When I was hired by the railroad, by CSX 18 years ago, my boss at the time told me, your job is to close every grade crossing in the state. Now, obviously that's not going to happen, right? But the point being is that grade crossings are for the traveling public. The railroad does not view grade crossings as for them. But in North Carolina, they have closed 300 crossings. They have also funded the freight rail projects at an average of about $17 million a year over the last 3 years. Freight rail projects are also eligible for funding through what they call a strategic transportation initiative investments, and that's another major source of funding in North Carolina. Virginia has 25 employees in their rail division. They also have a dedicated revenue stream to railroads called the Rail Enhancement Fund. Supports freight and passenger rail and is used by the Class 1s, the Port of Virginia, as well as the VRE. And the VRE is the commuter rail branch of Virginia. There's a 30% required match for funds. They always have more applications than they have funding available. And they 2/3 of this, interestingly enough, Chairman, is funded by motor vehicle rental taxes. That adds up to about $22 million annually. They also have a rail preservation fund that supports capital projects on short lines that does not have any dedicated funding, but they do. It does get appropriated on a yearly basis. And they also have what's called Rail Industrial Access Funds that supports spurs into companies to help with their economic development, as well as existing businesses. That also requires about a 30% match and about $2 to $3 million a year. So there are states that have looked at this, have adopted this. They've seen the public benefit to investing in not only a commuter railroad, but as well as the freight railroad. And I submit those to the commission just for consideration. I'm happy to get more information on that, but I'd also like to reiterate the fine work that Carol and her group does and the fine work that the commissioner does. So with that, we'll be happy to answer questions. I'll probably direct most of them to Eric, but I'm happy to do that.
Thank you, Craig. One of the things, if you could send that information over to Chelsea, I think that would be helpful. I know she can send it out to all the commission members. And also, we'll ask Abby to work with you to get some more information from North Carolina and Virginia on their funding models, so we can take a look at it. Questions?
Thank you, Craig. And Eric, in your slide that showed the dots as a capital improvement, inform us a little bit about sort of what you're thinking.
So, I'll give you an example on the Fitzgerald side. We could probably add 2 sidings a year, probably for the next 5 to 6 years, and still not keep up. Each siding, depending, of course, like anything else, depending on where you put it, rivers, bridges, or anything, but they generally run in the $10 to $15 million range per siding. At, you know, we like to build them as long as we can. But in that case, on the Fitzgerald side, we're probably going to kind of head that way as 2 sidings per year for the next, you know, at least 4 to 5 years.
Eric, I understand your plan to move more Waycross western part of the state. The route that you guys have from Savannah up to Augusta, straight into Atlanta, is that a potential route that could be developed for some dedicated purposes?
It is. So that you're talking about the Georgia Road, which is this part you're from Augusta over. So that's actually going to become very much important for us for right here for Savannah. A lot of that stuff that's coming through the canal wants to go into the interior of the U.S. So the fastest routing right now currently is this way. As weird as that is, that's the fastest way to get up here. We're going to do some work potentially on the I-95 corridor and then possibly up here to be able to get that stuff off a vessel, get it on a rail car, get it into Chicago, wherever it's going to go quickly. The goal is to try and do it in 2 days, which is pretty reasonable if you can, you know, build capacity.
So conceivably, it could be utilized more heavily
Yes,
as the port continues to grow.
Yes, sir. Yeah. One thing that I had to is the majority of our port stuff does come up through Waycross because it's going either offline Birmingham or going to the ground in Atlanta. Obviously, it's faster. So that's something to keep in mind too.
Thank you, Craig and Aaron. I have a quick question. In terms of operation, particularly locally, both here at Waycross and Valdosta, you mentioned you oversaw the dispatch, and I guess that's the day-to-day operation when trains come in and come out. One of the questions that I routinely get, and I don't know the answer to, is for what reason would a train be built and then dispatched out of the yard but sit outside the yard, not continue down the track? And for what reason would a train come to the yard gate and stop and wait? That seems to be the genesis of where most of the issues come here locally in Waycross and Valdosta, when a train is actually leaving the yard, it stops, and when a train comes into the yard, but stops short of the yard. The way I generalize it is that if the train's not moving, you guys want to see trains moving as much as everybody else, because if the train's not moving, you're not moving freight. So that's one question I have. And the second, as a follow-up, do you have any predictions or forecasts as to where we are in volume? Is the volume growing, or is the volume, roughly the same as last year, or are we continuing to forecast growth?
I'll answer the second one first. Right now, it's pretty steady. Of course, the overall economy is somewhat okay. The freight stuff has kind of leveled off a little bit. Railroads are a great way to determine if we're going into a recession, and for various reasons. But I'm not saying we're going into one, but just the leveling off is right now is kind of calm. That said, we're planning on growth, and you can see it in different things. Different manufacturers are asking for different things and/or planning ahead. Under our new model of how we operate, they're getting better service in most cases, so they're bringing it. In the Waycross, in Thomasville, in the Valdosta area, it's definitely growing. Definitely growing. We're getting a lot of requests on the bow line here, as we call it, for sidings or different things that customers are looking to do, which is a good problem for everybody. The first one, in terms of, my career, I started as a crew dispatcher and then went to train dispatcher. So my main goal was to keep those little red lights moving and keep everybody, the number one rule, keep everybody safe. So there's a multitude of different reasons why they stop. Some cases, like we'll pull them out of the yard because we need the capacity. Waycross is a good example. We're doing so much here. In a lot of cases, we're kind of hemmed in. We can't do much expansion. So we've got to get the freight out so we can bring other ones in. Another case might be we may not have a rested crew. So we'll pull the train out to do more production and then get the rested crew on the train when we can. When they're coming in, it's a couple different reasons. Majority of the time it's capacity. We don't have a track for it to get in there and get humped. Sometimes it's just poor planning. The yardmaster and the train dispatcher, I'm guilty of it, weren't talking and weren't planning properly. So sometimes it's a communication thing. Other times it might be a mechanical thing. You know, a locomotive, had an issue and it shut down, and we could kind of limp it to get to as close as we can, and we got to get extra power to get it out there and pull it. There's a whole multitude of different reasons.
Eric, for you and Craig, you obviously have a list of prioritized projects to move forward with that you need. Rough ballpark in the state of Georgia, what do you need to spend to get your rails up to where you want them right now?
I can tell you one thing, Georgia's probably in my top 3 of areas that I spend. I get, it ebbs and flows. I get about $200 million to kind of play with every year across the entire network. Georgia gets probably a majority of it in the top 3. Next year, we're probably looking at, just for capacity things, and I'm not talking maintenance or any of this other stuff. Capacity things, we're probably looking at about $50 million just in the state of Georgia. For the next couple of years going forward. Mostly, like I said, those sidings are expensive, the second mains, because unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, we have built the easy sidings. We built the second mains that are easy. We built them where we can. Now we're into the tough ones. We're into either making a tunnel, or we got to make a bridge, and bridges, my lord, they are expensive.
So $50 million a year over even 10 years, is that your total capital needs?
It's probably likely more, because we'll have to do stuff at the hump here, for example, and Waycross to modernize it as we go. A lot of it runs on computers. Every year, those computers, every 2 to 3 years, have to be modernized. There's not many hump yards in North America. There's basically 2 people that make processors for hump yards, and they can charge any price that they want. So those processors for like a place, especially at Waycross, which is a double hump, is even more rare. So they charge it, consumerably with it. So yeah, between the sidings and all that stuff, it could be easily more.
One of the things from our earlier presentation and from listening to you talk and Andy last night, one of our goals, of course, is to do what we can to encourage more freight to go into the rail lines to get it off the highways, because that's all of us. But it's occurred to me as I'm thinking about Amazon and those of us who purchase everything every day and have dollars that purchase everything every day, they want it instantaneous. So the rail industry's had to adapt to that and had to become more efficient. And I know we heard last night some great things happening in Rice Yard, how quickly they were bringing the train in, bringing the car in, getting it back out compared to a few years ago. That time it really decreased. But I would assume in order for the rail industry to continue to stay competitive and moving freight, you have to do that. You have to find ways to cut the amount of time that it takes from the time it gets to Savannah to the time it gets to its end destination. You've seen more and more of a push for that.
Absolutely. 2 things on that. The state of Georgia, of all the states, now granted, I keep east of the Mississippi and a little bit of Canada, but east of there, the state of Georgia is a leg up on everybody. And the number 1 reason are these inland ports that you're doing. You've got Cordele and Chatsworth now. That is all about speed. Keep the ports and the containers coming off, keep them in there, keep them bonded, get them on a rail car, get it out. It creates capacity, but it also speeds up things. And I'm starting to see the state of New York wanting to do them. There's other states that I deal with that are following your lead, so kudos to you guys if you've had any hand in that. And that's helping keep capacity and growth in your network here. What was the second part that you asked there again about the?
Well, I was just referring to the fact of how much you've already decreased the amount of time it takes to get cars out of Rice Yard, for instance.
Yeah, so if that rail wheel is not moving, we're not making money, and it's got to be sped up somehow. And there's a multitude of different ways of doing it. Either better computer systems, adapting how we deal with things, how we switch them, how we handle them. Potentially length, different things. Technology has improved to the point with DPU now. I've learned one thing in my years at the railroad: if you can make an engineer happy, you've done something really good. Because and majority of these guys love this DPU that allows us to have longer trains, and that in turn keeps those cars moving. Waycross here is, I can tell you, from being on the morning call every morning when our chief executive officer's on there, one of the #1 spots he asks about is Waycross, Georgia. What's the health of Waycross today? Because as Waycross goes, the entire south from Nashville goes with us. The minute these guys have a hiccup, it is a catastrophe down the line somewhere, honestly. So they monitor it, and resources get put into that to make sure they get capacity and they keep everything flowing from, can we fuel a locomotive quicker? Can we sand a locomotive quicker? Can we move a locomotive quicker by putting different shove lights or whatnot into a receiving or departure yard? It's all about speed. Keep that freight rolling. And as you roll it, then we can backfill it with customers that want to come online further.
I think if I can add to that Chairman, we talked about last night, is the fact that the need to get freight from Waycross to Chicago a lot quicker. And I think at one point, I think what Rodney had mentioned last night was that could be as far as 20 days. Now, because of new efficiencies that have happened, and the precision scheduled railroad that is the model that's being run now, the fact that we've eliminated the touch points where trains go. So at one point, if you had a train that was moving from Chicago, it had to go to Nashville, then it had to go to Atlanta, then maybe it had to go to Manchester, then it had to come down. Well, some of these have been eliminated, and now you've got these trains that are moving quicker, and we've cut that delivery time in half. And as you said, you want it today. The just-in-time delivery is big, and that's where this is headed here in terms of railroad in order to stay competitive.
So, Craig, for you, from our perspective, as we start looking at, we understand a lot of the issues and start looking for solutions. It sounds like I think you did a good job of House Senate Bill 89 having a dedicated line in the budget that was introduced to the Senate 2 years ago, I guess. That's the priority for the rail industry, it sounds like. Looking at these taxes that the rail industry pays and where those dollars go, or of course y'all would like to eliminate that, but at least taking a look at that as a priority. And then looking at what some other states are doing from a funding perspective, where the state is able to put some dollars in certain aspects of the rail industry, siding, side locations, grade crossings, moving forward with that. All of those are priorities for you that you think would enhance your ability to move more freight off the road on the rail.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I'd be remiss, and Eric touched on it, if we didn't talk about the work that's being done at the port. And the mega rail facility that was discussed in Savannah has been a tremendous help to help with all the freight that is projected to come in. We're talking about doubling the size of that port here over the next 5 years, is that right, Lee? And but we have 18%, I think, of that traffic goes on rail. Even if that percentage doesn't rise at all, think about the extra couple of million lifts of 18%. is still going to be on the freight rail. And of course, we're hopeful that that number goes up, but in either way, we are trying to prepare for increased freight in the future.
What do you think is a realistic number for that to go from 18% to what?
You know what, this is Craig's opinion. I think if you increase it by 2 to 3%, that's significant, but I'd prefer to really hear from that answer.
And then, I think Eric mentioned inland ports, and it's good to hear some positive feedback about that program. And I'm assuming, I know our Griffith Port and others continue to work with our Class 1 specifically to look at other strategic locations around the state where it would be potentially a positive place to locate those. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, sir. And of course, Chatsworth is CSX. You have one that's already up and being developed, which is Gainesville, which will be on Norfolk Southern. You have the Cordele Inland Port. And then I can say this, I remember Lee asking Jamie if I could mention this, he told me no, and then when he and I did a panel discussion together, it was the first thing that you're talking about over in West Point, over in that area. And I would say, again, defer to the ports, but I think that's conceptually right there. I don't believe we're anywhere close, but it is an area that's being looked at.
Right. Wouldn't you say that with the expansion of the Jimmy Mason Rail Yard, that 3% would be pretty easy to get to?
I believe so, yes.
But maybe leaving answers out of it, you know, and what kind of impact that? I'd like to see 25%. I mean, that'd be a huge impact, I believe. And I think we should make that goal and really work hard to do that once the rail yard's expanded and really put it, you know, kind of make that target. That's just my opinion.
So we do expect to see that 18% increase closer to 25%. We expect to see rail grow at a faster rate than the truck moves will. And it's because of and that's why we're making the investments that we're making on the inland ports and on the mega rail, because with the expansion of the Panama Canal, that Midwest area that you know is served by in the Green Line here, you know, that's now a new market that's served by East Coast ports, and of course we want to be the one that everyone chooses to use. And you don't serve Chicago from Savannah by a truck. We serve Chicago by rail, as well as St. Louis and Dallas and Memphis and all those other cities. So in order for us to get there, it's got to have a healthy system on the rail side.
I think one of the other things too that's important for us to remember, I know the commission does a good job keeping this in mind, as we build these inland ports, as we were involved, those create congestion issues around inland ports, great growth opportunities, but we're going to have to be prepared as a state with additional resources and dollars and road infrastructure to keep that freight moving and other public moving around that area. Any other questions, comments? Thank you all.
I've just got one more message to Chairman Beach. Go Dogs.
Thank you. All right, next up, we have one of our own commission members, Brad Skinner, and Cameron Scott with Omnitracks, talking about infrastructure initiatives for reducing congestion and stimulating economic growth and development. Mr. Skinner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay? Never sure about these mics after yesterday. It's a pleasure to be here to present to the Commission today. Cameron Scott's going to be my partner in this process, and we're both members of the board of Omnitracks. I've distributed copies of our slideshow to you, and there's also a stack of them over there for the public if you'd like to get one. We'd like to talk about some ideas. We're not here to ask for anything. We're just basically here to talk about ideas that have worked in other parts of North America to solve congestion issues as well as economic development issues. My background is primarily in intermodal rail and shorelines, container ships, and truckload carriers, the last 42 years. And Cameron's background is was the executive vice president of the Union Pacific system. He worked there for about 30 years, and I think he's seen it all. So I think our comments will only reinforce some of the things we've talked about this morning as possible things to look at that might deal with the issues facing all of us. Chairman Tanner and Beach asked us to provide some of these ideas, so again, focused on decongestion or how to manage congestion, and then also focused on economic development. Let's see, we got this a little clicker here, don't we? So, as we all remember, on May 15th, the Lieutenant Governor Duncan and Speaker Ralston laid out some real aggressive, in my opinion, challenges for the Commission. And they were going to focus on all of the things that we have to consider, and in my judgment, to do something very big, because the challenge is going to be extremely big as the state continues to grow. And when I sum up these thoughts that the Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker presented to us through public media, these are questions that I think were raised, and that is, how can the state administration, the Assembly, and private partnerships position Georgia as a continued desirable place for international and national investment? How does Georgia maintain its quality of life as population continues to develop and expand? How does the expansion of the port affect terminals, imports, exports, and domestic distribution throughout the state? And finally, how does Georgia support and take advantage of its ports, its railroads, its highways, to accelerate intrastate and international commerce? When I think about what we're faced with, and it's really an opportunity during the next 7 to 15 years, these things come to mind. That the Port of Savannah is, from my perspective, and I've managed various ports with railroads for a long time, it's probably the best port I've ever seen, and it has the most potential to continue to grow. It is a premier asset, just as we discussed yesterday. The airport in Atlanta is outstanding, the convention services are outstanding, but this port is an economic engine for the future economic prosperity of this entire state. When you think about the challenges that we've heard in a previous session, moving from 4.4 million lifts to perhaps 10 to 13 million lifts in the years ahead, that is a significant challenge. It can be managed at the port, but how do you move those units effectively and efficiently? And so I think about the good work that NS and CSX and the port are doing at the mega terminal. It's going to be a wonderful addition, but that's 500,000 lifts out of the 4.4 million. And I think, as Craig just talked about a few minutes ago, and Connor certainly agrees, we're going to have more rail capability if we're really going to deal with congestion of the roadways and effective and efficient economic development and expansion of the port. So the big challenge from I think our perspective is that government policy and rail and highway and engineering, they all need to be in sync and carefully and strategically thought out. This is not a piecemeal approach, because the challenge and the growth is going to be very significant, and I don't think there's any way to stop it given the congestion of other ports or as far behind as other ports are on the eastern seaboard. So all the parties, vested interests, including the public, need to focus on the strategy, to be transparent, and to set up some very attainable goals. The reality is that whatever is decided upon, it's going to cost a lot of money. And hopefully a lot of that money can be private money, and also public money. And we'll be giving several examples of things that have worked in other parts of North America. Railroads traditionally like longer lengths of haul, and we understand that. Eric certainly understands that from the CSX presentation, because you can spread your fixed costs over a much longer length. But railroads could also be possibly interested in shorter lengths, and that could be the intermodal corridor somehow between the port and Atlanta. And as long as those strategies don't in any way interfere with their rights of way and somehow could be optimized. With some kinds of mechanisms, it could be revenue bonds, it could be other ROI strategies, it could be invested in the state as a true public-private partnership. But those are things that other people have done, and we'll be presenting them. But the reality is, no matter what we decide as a future, it's got to be a required integrated sponsorship of the state administration, of the assembly, of the ports, of the rail providers, of Georgia DOT and Georgia Chamber. And that just has to happen. And if it doesn't happen, it's gonna, or it could effectively block the expansion of the port and the outstanding economic opportunity that it provides. So we'll be giving 3 examples here, and Cameron's going to give the first one. Cameron, in his role as Executive Vice President of Union Pacific, was very intimately involved in this particular project that occurred in the LA Basin, called the Alameda Corridor.
All right, the first thing I'd like to say is I never imagined I'd be on a stage that Elvis Presley performed on. So it's quite fascinating to be up here in front of you. In fact, I'm going to ask my good friend Ed to take a picture so I can add it to my, so you have to take a picture of it, so I can add it to my photo album. I don't think my performance here in the next couple of minutes will be as exciting as Elvis, but I hope to help give you some ideas as you tackle this important task that's in front of you. I should say I am a proud University of Texas graduate, which means I thoroughly enjoyed last year's bowl game. However, I am thankful I am not playing Georgia this year because I think the outcome would be very, very different. I do want to congratulate you I've read over and over again, year after year, about the great business environment that the state of Georgia has created, and it is really refreshing and very rare coming from the West Coast Railroad, and I think what you're doing here is going to cement that reputation for years to come. Okay, so I'm going to transport you back in time a little bit. I do need, this is not the Port of Savannah growth figures. It might look like that, but it's not. The years are kind of small, so way over on the far side of the graph is the year 1990. And the last chart you see, or the last bars you see, are 1999. So that's both BNSF and Union Pacific tackling the twin ports of LA and Long Beach, and doing a pretty decent job of it because the growth was nice and steady and wasn't too dynamic. What happened at the end of 1999 is both ports came to both railroads, pulled us into a room, much smaller than this one, and presented this to us. Now that's the year 2010. They said in the next decade we'll move from roughly 4 million containers handled to 10 million containers handled, or 8 million containers. Basically both ports saying that their growth was going to double. We hear the same from the Port of Savannah. Now, you're about 4 million and you're projecting the exact same type of growth pattern. And they very politely said 2 challenges. Number 1, this growth cannot hit the streets of LA. Traffic is bad enough as it is. So BN and UP, you must be prepared to step up to the plate and tackle this growth. Your growth has to double at least from what it is today. And when that happens, as many of you have heard today, you are going to slam into all the community railroad crossings that exist, and we have to figure out how to stop you from stopping the cities as you tackle this growth. So two big challenges, to which both UP and BNSF said, very politely, we have no idea how we're going to do that. Right? I mean, truthfully, that is an enormous task. 1999, both companies were running about 50 trains per day at peak. What they were asking us to do is to run 100 trains per day at peak through the same cities, 60 miles of the LA basin, which was that's like us trying to figure out how to go to Mars, right? I mean, neither railroad had the answer, and the state and the counties didn't either. But we knew we had to step up to the challenge. So what we did, and in the background here throughout this presentation, is an end result, probably the most impactful result. That's the Alameda Corridor. So what happened in this falls right in line with what Brad was saying. What happened is the entities of the state and the port formed a partnership right out of the gate. The state, multiple county entities, multiple transit authorities, and both ports are competing against each other now, formed a united front with a single entity. That caught both UP and BNSF's attention, and we formed a consortium of sorts as well, led by network planning operations of both railroads. And that group, which is a very large group, formed an official Triple P, or private partnership. And that was an enormous Triple P group that went out to seek not only state funds, but also federal funds to tackle a variety of initiatives. Those initiatives, over a long period of time, a decade plus, came flowing out of that Triple P came the following essential components that did successfully end up tackling 100 trains per day. The recession got in the way of all of our businesses at every port in the United States. So that graph I showed you of roughly 8 to 9 million, 10 million containers tackled by LA and Long Beach is now happening today, pretty close. So it's a little decade late. But we did successfully reach that 100 train per day at peak target. So each one of these initiatives I could spend 15 minutes on. That's not the point of that. It's just to show you a variety of very, very creative, very expensive, very transformational type projects that happen in the LA basin that allow the train traffic to move from 50 to 100 today and keep all those trucks off the city streets of Los Angeles. So the most fun one is the Alameda Corridor. That's what you see in the background. That is a triple track railroad that runs at peak 100 trains per day. It is a trench 20 miles long. If you're flying over LA, it looks like a great big zipper. You know, it's below the street level. It eliminated 50 crossings. The streets are still there, but it eliminated 50 interfaces with the railroads and the public. And there was absolutely no way those 50 streets could function at 100 trains a day, so it was a mandate for us to do that. That's not the only trench in LA. There were several trenches in LA. There were multiple flyovers to get the trains and the streets separated completely. It's been an enormous project. The other really transformational project was the West Colton flyover. That's where they lifted the Union Pacific Railroad, double track up above the BNSF railroads so that we didn't collide with each other, not literally, but go back and forth with each other on a 100 train per day train count. So it freed up the railroad system as well. So a very, very successful Triple P. I would challenge all of you in the room to think about such a structure. It is very hard to put together because both BN and UP were competitors. You had both ports as competitors, sometimes counties are competitors, but in the end, you're trying to do the right thing for the right reasons, and it turned out very, very well.
How many containers can you take off the road, those 100 trains?
It's close to 30,000 a day if you do the actual math. So very, very impactful to the whole LA basin, which is about a 60-mile radius city.
Now that kind of project started at 1.5 billion 20 years ago. It's currently at about 4 billion, but it certainly continues to have the support of the entire LA basin, and it certainly has reduced congestion and really accelerated economic growth. So that's one example we wanted to share with you, just to discuss that we're not suggesting here's the solution, but there might be components of it that could be pursued. I wanted to present this example as another public-private partnership. Sorry.
I think we have a quick question before you move on.
Go back, if you could go back to that slide. If you had to pick one of those on that list, which one would you pick? If you could do only one thing, what would you do?
You had to do all of them, actually. This wasn't the type of project where you could pick one and 80% of the benefits would solve your problem statement. You really had to do all of them, and all of them didn't happen at once. This was over a 10 or 15-year time frame. And it would be really fun to go down each list and tell you about the benefits of each, but they all had to be done.
So your answer.
You may cover this in a few minutes, but just out of curiosity, in this public-private partnership, out of the dollars you're saying, and I think a total now of about $4 billion, where is the majority of those dollars coming from? Is it private investment dollars?
When you look at the 75 miles of double track, that was to flow quickly away from the basin as fast as you could. That was all BNSF and UP investment. The Colton flyover was a triple P, where most of the investment came from federal and state, but both railroads also pitched in. Alameda Corridor was a unique funding project. It was very, very expensive. Both UP and BN pay a user fee every time they run a train in that corridor that helps continue to fund the overall maintenance and the cost of the project.
The second example I have here is the creation of the privatization of the Mexican National Railroad. In 1998, I led this project with Kansas City Southern and with TMM, which is both our publicly traded companies, but we also developed a partnership with the government of Mexico and with all of the unions in Mexico. And we transformed this property into a highly efficient railroad. Everybody thought we were crazy when we bought it, including the UP and others, but it became a very efficient pathway to and from what I consider a similar situation with the Port of Savannah. Think about Laredo, Texas, which is, where is that? I think it's, shoot. Right there? No, it's in the center. So Laredo is right there. And in a way, it's similar to the Port of Savannah. It's the primary gateway to and from huge markets, the ocean being our huge markets, in and out of that gateway. And at this time, NAFTA had just taken off. But we wanted to figure out how can we make this a highway, a very efficient highway. And so we, again, engaged with the government, we engaged with all kinds of private people who wanted to build terminals, who wanted to put in additional advantages so the route could work efficiently. And so we did create this entity which went from about 3% of all cross-border to 25% of all cross-border over a period of about 8 years. So a lot of rail acceleration because we made the route itself have more reach. Just like the Port of Savannah was attempting to do to the Midwest, to the west, to the Northeast. Reach, and the reach occurs because of efficiency of the rail systems to be able to extend to those markets. So what we did is several major things. I mean, in addition to working with the unions, we reduced a lot of power, person power, but we paid everybody 3-year severance. And so we were able to reduce and make the railroad down to 2-man crews, similar to the United States today. But we were able to focus 2 major physical investments. And the first one involved, let me get my script here so I can look at the slide instead of trying to read it the way it is now. The first one involved creating the ability to meet and pass trains while they're still moving. And so what we did is we put in 22 10,000-foot sidings so that trains could approach each other and they could keep moving as they went through those sidings, so that we made a single-track railroad, in a way a double-track railroad. And we put in 22 of those passing lanes so that, again, the trains never stopped. And that improved the efficiency and the reach of being able to serve the United States and the United States to Mexico as a rail provider. At the same time, we were able to look at putting in a lot more switches. And those switches cost about $250,000, $300,000 each. The sidings that I talked about just a second ago were about $2.5 to $3 million compared to $10 million here. But they certainly, again, created the reach and the efficiency. And the sidings, and we didn't even really realize just what an impact they would have. But we wanted to serve rural parts of Mexico. And so cities like Aguascalientes, San Luis Potosí, Querétaro, Puebla, Toluca, Veracruz, these used to be secondary markets, but they became more production centers because you were able to have sidings, you were able to have rail service, you were able to have terminal sidings that allowed you to do more intermodal and carload. And all of a sudden, these rural areas began to blossom and to expand rapidly. And as they became more prosperous, because they were able to hire more people, they bought a lot more goods from the United States. So it became a very balanced pattern. This property went from a $60 million loss per year to $236 million of EBITDA in a 4-year period. But it had two major things that I want you to think about. That is, one, by working with sidings, more sidings put into place, we were able to improve the efficiency and the reach of what I can say Laredo is Savannah, the reach of that port and that entire gateway. And secondly, we were able to economically develop rural areas of Mexico that heretofore had not expanded economically. Now certainly, those rural areas had to be just as competitive as Monterrey and Mexico City were in the past. But by having the rail services and then having private investment in terminals, in sidings, and other programs through both government as well as private investment, this entire system became extremely profitable and efficient, and certainly affected the economic vitality of a lot of places that never would have been impacted. My contention here, or something to think about, is the kinds of things that is happening right now at Chatsworth with the port and with CSX, the kinds of things that will happen in Gainesville, the types of things that could happen in West Point. You make these export centers, and all of a sudden, they're balancing the port's traffic, and all of a sudden, you could look at other successful models, the same model perhaps in other areas of rural Georgia, and with fiber optics, with good training in digital. These could be places that the Department of Economic Development and the technical college system of Georgia could truly transform rural Georgia. But we got to think it all out, and that is the challenge, to think it out in advance so that the wonderful opportunity that the port provides us today will not be stymied. Cameron has a couple other examples. Oh, I should change my slides when I was talking. Anyway.
All right, Brad and I picked these examples with a little bit of intent because there are many examples we could talk about. This is one of my favorite called Tower 55 in Fort Worth. That is obviously an old picture of Tower 55. Today's Tower 55 has a freeway system that looks as complicated as that looks to you from a railroad perspective. And the story here is that on occasion, it takes the governor to get both railroads moving to tackle a project that involves a bottleneck that is both railroad driven and freeway driven. And I imagine as you look at port growth, that you will eventually run into your own Tower 55 project. This was the governor of Texas calling both CEOs of both railroads and saying we have to rebuild our interstate system over Tower 55, and it not only is Tower 55, but it will impact your version of Waycross in Dallas called Davidson Yard. So it really got complicated for both BNSF and Union Pacific. Again, it formed a triple P project. The price tag was about 125, 150 million, so that gives you the scope of the project. But in the end, the freeway capacity was doubled, and the rail capacity through Tower 55 was doubled as well, because the speed was increased to what looked like a snail's pace at 10 mph, got up to 30 mph. So good outcome for both the railroads and an outstanding outcome for the state and its citizens, but not an easy one to accomplish. It was talked about for years, and finally, I imagine the Texas Commission, like you, got frustrated, had to go to the governor to CEOs, project got off a dime, and when that message comes down to people like me, it's pretty clear from the CEO. Just talk to the governor, we're going to do this project, I don't want to hear from her again. Okay, got the message. You know, we will march and we'll get this done, which we did, got it done in 6 months. All right, the last project is a different story. This is also the state of Texas. It was mentioned earlier that you do own some rail assets. This is an example of the state of Texas buying a short line that had basically withered into the dust towards going towards the Mexican border, out towards Alpine, Texas. The state of Texas bought it, has resurrected it, and are opening a brand new rail port between the countries of Mexico and the United States. That should be done later this year, possibly into the first half of next year. Sometimes, and this may be a little different for the state of Georgia now, but sometimes when you have an initiative that you have set your mind to, the private companies of the world will not make the necessary investment because you have a greater good that you're trying to tackle, i.e. opening a brand new rail port between Mexico and the United States. Sometimes it makes no sense in an ROI world, and sometimes you have to get ready as a state to outlay a bunch of money to accomplish your vision. And that's the only story that we're trying to present to you here with those two gold shovels. This is a picture from this year. 2 gold shovels in dirt and a ratty looking bridge that's going to be rebuilt, and beyond that bridge will be the brand new interchange between Mexico and the United States from a rail perspective. Okay.
So we hope that these examples just help us think about things. Whatever we eventually come up with in terms of recommendations, we believe that there will be a need for a public-private partnership because the magnitude of some of the challenges that the state is facing in terms of growth, in terms of possibilities of decongestion that have to occur, or keeping congestion controlled, as well as economic development are significant. And there's a huge opportunity. You'll all have it. We all have it. And in rural Georgia, I see great opportunities too, linking it to the port. You probably don't know this, but I lived in Albany for 3 years, and I managed a very large trucking company. So as I went into Albany, I let everybody know I'm a Westerner and not a Yankee, and that helped a lot in terms of accepting me, and I hope you'll do the same. I put in one last slide on conclusion, and that is whatever the commission decides to do, it's got to be a strategic and a comprehensive and a consensus building exercise. The opportunity is so great for the future of Georgia, its economic viability and its quality of life. If it's done right, it's going to be a magnificent accomplishment of this commission and future generations of Georgians. So thank you very much.
There may be some questions. One of the things that you were talking about, public-private partnerships, I know the Georgia Chamber says transportation lines has started an initiative several months ago. We have meetings with both public and private entities to look at how can we make Georgia more competitive with other states in getting private investment dollars in for infrastructure improvements. So, Paul, Chris, Georgia Chamber for taking that initiative, starting that conversation. It sounds like that's got to be part of the solution, which is something we heard today. Questions?
Brad, thank you very much for your informative. Following the chairman's line on the comments there about can you tease out just a little bit about the construction public property on Tower 55 in Louisville, Alabama. I'm sure that was a small little document at financial close, complex P3. If you remember, just talking a little bit about the tenants, which was a major foundational part. So roles and responsibilities, where they did what fund sources, whether it was RIFIA or federal or states, and there's what kind of bonds they use or whatever.
So I feel like bringing Craig up here for that because he can probably have his own examples of triple Ps in your state. My experience with every triple P, depending on its mission, is that the construct is different. Alameda Corridor was very different from Tower 55. I think the most important aspect of it is that there's an agreement on the vision. This sounds a very big, broad brushstroke, I know. Agreement on the vision and who owns the responsibility within the railroad to embed itself in the triple P. That often is a multi-year assignment for a singular individual where they leave their job and their new job becomes a triple P because they are so complicated and involve so many cities and so many counties and so many regulations and so many design issues that you're interfacing with. You have to have a dedicated person that never leaves that project until it's done. It is extremely important from a public affairs perspective from the railroad that the same thing happens because they're always very, very sensitive from multiple perspectives. The funding side of it always gets very interesting. There's always split contributions from various railroads and a variety of sources because usually these projects are in the $200, $300, $400 million range, if not more. Very similar to your airport projects you saw yesterday, one after another at $200, $300 million. It's the same when you start tackling Tower 55 type projects. It's just unlike your airport example. It'll be 4 or 5 different funding mechanisms, if not user fees as well, when the project is done, like the Alameda Corridor.
Commissioner, let me add to that. In the Mexican example with the company we created there were 2 public entities, 2 public shareholding companies, but we formed another company. And that company was standalone. Government of Mexico was part of it. Even the union was part of it. And what we did with that company then is we went out after private funds. So as we wanted to build a terminal, we went through New York, found all kinds of private monies with revenue bonds that as these terminals were built and as they began to turn volume, just like our airports in this country, we expanded many of our airports that way 40 years ago. You know, you would charge a fee every time. And those have all been fairly successful. And we did the same thing on certain routes that nobody else, or they were lower incentivized routes because there wasn't a lot of traffic there at the moment. But we worked with, again, various investment groups and the government of Mexico in those cases, because it was a longer term investment, they underread all of the risks.
Thank you.
It would be helpful for me and maybe some of the other members if you've got any additional information on specific funding mechanisms for those bonds, how those triple Ps were set up. I would like to look at that. So if you could get any of that detail and send it to Chelsea, and she can send it out to commission members, because I know there's GDOT's doing a good job with public-private partnerships. I know there's a Georgia Chamber continues to look for avenues and ideas and solutions. It would be helpful to see what's been successful in some of these other locations. You could send that to us, I would appreciate it. Any other questions? I think just for since we're running ahead of schedule a little bit, it's okay with the commission. And I think Tom with HTV is here. And Chelsea's going to key up the power plant. We'll go ahead and let HTV go. And then they finish, we'll break for lunch. And then after lunch, we'll I tell you what, while we're doing that, why don't we just take a quick 5-minute break, and we'll start back next about 5. Everyone to come to order. We're going to get started back with the meeting so that we can move forward. One of the things that we hear a lot of conversation about is we're talking about the freight commission, freight rail, looking for more infrastructure dollars. We hear a lot about the work that Roberts is in the room, Senator Goodens here on the commission, Chairman Lee, and others who work back several years ago now, that resulted in House Bill 170, and one of the greatest pieces of legislation the state's probably ever seen around infrastructure, investment in infrastructure, and it's really made a huge difference in the state. If it wasn't for House Bill 170, we would be having a completely different conversation today about Georgia and what Georgia looks like. So thank you for all of our local leaders, both in the public and private sector, who worked hard on that. Leading up to House Bill 170, there was some studies that were done for transportation lines, paid for some of these studies to be done about the need for investment dollars in infrastructure. And we thought, Chairman Beach and I thought that it would be a good idea for those who were not involved and didn't understand what those numbers were like, is to have HETB who did that study, and Tom's here to talk about that, bring us, give us a recap so that we can all remember what they told us then and kind of what that funding gap looks like today. And really, that should not be a lot of big surprise to those of us who saw those numbers several years ago. So, Tom, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Beach and the Commission, for this opportunity. We're going to take a backward look, as the Chairman mentioned, at a study that was completed about 5 years ago, the year prior to the passage of the Transportation Funding Act. So to briefly set the table, in the year 2010, the legislature had passed legislation that allowed 12 regions to vote to increase revenue to support transportation investment. The vote in 2012, three of those 12 regions passed at that time. Subsequently, a 4th region has passed. However, Metro did not pass in Metro Atlanta and several other regions throughout the state. But then in 2014, Metro Atlanta Chamber and GTA approached HNTB about looking at getting a quantitative assessment of economic benefits associated with investing in transportation. So this report was developed over the course of that year, presented at the back end of 2014 to the Joint Study Commission on Critical Transportation Infrastructure Funding, and then immediately preceded the vote in the next legislative session that passed TFA. In addition, on the team, HNTB's team was EY, and also some background information provided by the Urban Land Institute. So the objective of this study was really to provide an overview of the landscape and the background of the transportation funding conditions at that time. So this is a snapshot in time. It sought to address these 4 key questions. What are those most critical transportation needs in Georgia in the future? What are the spending ranges needed for various packages as we look to address system preservation, some critical needs, and then a larger universe of projects? And then, using some economic modeling, what are the economic outcomes that we can anticipate in terms of return on investment, in terms of job creation in the state of Georgia as a result of that investment in transportation? And then how could the spending potentially be leveraged with other funding sources to deliver on these needs for Georgians? So I'll start with the bibliography first, but the objective here was not to reinvent the wheel, but to capitalize on a lot of great work that the Georgia Department of Transportation, that the Atlanta Regional Commission had done in reaching out to their various constituents to develop project lists. And
And so we were able to tap several reports that existed at the time. There was a GDOT unfunded project needs document, the Freight and Logistics Plan. It's going to be updated here shortly. The statewide strategic transportation plan, and even the Transportation Investment Act project list. And we took a deep look into those at the time, the 9 regions who had not passed their legislation to extract projects from those lists as well. And then in 2013, the SSTP was updated, and we were able to pull information from that as well to create really a master project list for us to get our arms around in terms of evaluating the economic impact. One of the first steps in this study was setting the baseline, getting an understanding of where we stood historically in terms of investment in transportation in Georgia. And you can see here that at the time, and again, backward-looking snapshot, there was about a $2.2 billion annual expenditure, made up of about 1.2 from the feds and about $1 billion from the state. And you can see in the pie chart the distribution and allocation of those resources across different project types. We also looked at where we stood. As you think about the relative competitiveness of Georgia, attractiveness for growth in households and employment, we baseline this by looking at other southeastern states. You see some facts and figures here. If you're familiar with the 2014 pamphlet, this is all information that you've seen before. But at the time, Georgia had a debt service at the state level, not DOT specifically, but at the state level, that was higher than many of our peers. In 2013, GDOT was resurfacing about 2% of roadways, but in the following year that dipped a little bit. And GDOT's goal is ultimately to resurface between 6 and 7% every year in 15-year increments. So we were kind of under-delivering on some of these goals at the time. See here the comparison of expenditures by state. We did try to extract information from states with similar profiles in terms of total lane mileage, and looked at the expenditures that Georgia's making relative to some of these peer states. And you can see at the time where Georgia fell relative to states like Illinois, Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And then we tried to understand what the implications would be if that snapshot in time funding scenario played out into the future, and what that would mean in terms of investment, and some of the outcomes that we could anticipate associated with that. Draw your attention to third bullet. So the Texas Transportation Institute periodically publishes a cost of congestion calculation, and at the time in Metro Atlanta it was about $1,100 per person in cost of congestion, wasted time, and wasted fuel. And that was anticipated to double to nearly $2,200 over the course of this time period if current funding and current expenditure levels were to be maintained. So in pouring through those documents from those resources that I summarized earlier, we had 9 project categories, and for the purposes of communication to the Freight and Logistics Commission, there wasn't a specific freight and logistics category. However, projects that benefit the freight and logistics community could potentially come from a number of these types of categories, but we had categorized them interstate capacity all the way to transit and even bike bed, and then maintenance and safety projects. So these were the bundles of projects that were identified and categorized at the time. So what we then did was look at 3 tiers of funding scenarios. The first of which we characterize as system preservation. This is the level of investment to deliver the projects that would maintain our infrastructure in a state of good repair. And at the time, many of these projects were unfunded. In fact, as we looked long term, we identified $37 billion worth of infrastructure just to maintain state of good repair was unfunded. Dividing that by a 35 or 25-year time period gave us this number that you may remember of $1 billion to about $1.5 billion annually. At the time was the deficit to maintain state of good repair. The types of projects that were included were really just bridge maintenance, other statewide maintenance of our technology assets in the field, the ATMS and other ITS technologies. So really just maintaining what we had. The source for this particular subset of the project list was GDOT's unfunded project needs and then ARC's constrained 2040 plan. The second tier that we identified is titled critical needs. So we again used the same two sources, GDOT's unfunded project needs and ARC's constrained 2040 plan. But here we zoomed out and considered projects that existed in other categories. That included capacity addition, but other critical needs that had been identified around the state. Local projects that hadn't identified any state funding at the time were eliminated from this particular project list. And collectively, we identified about $71 billion for this tier. Now that does include what was previously communicated in system preservation, but $34 billion over what was identified in system preservation to meet these statewide critical needs. And annualizing that gets us about $2 to $3 billion a year if you consider a 35 to 25 year period. So our third category was the universe of needs. Here we broadened the source documents that were leveraged. We included projects that were identified as part of Georgia's freight and logistics plan, and also those 9 regions across the state and their TIA project lists that existed at the time. Again, we did strip out local projects that did not have identified state funding, and collectively we came to about $135 billion worth of investment over this approximately 40-year period, almost $100 billion over what was identified for system preservation. And then you can see annually what that implication is. So here's a graph that kind of summarizes what I just shared, that shows in red there, you see system preservation really focused only on these couple of project types, bridges, maintenance and safety. And then as we move to critical needs, we consider regional mobility. This could be a greenfield extension project. This could be a widening project of some sort on a state highway. Interstate capacity specifically was included in the critical needs conversation. And then also some contribution in the transit, intermodal, and interchanges categories as well. And then as we zoom out and look at the entire universe of needs, a lot of broader project set was considered in that scenario. So this figure appeared in that 2014 pamphlet and summarizes these 3 tiers of investment and what that means in terms of annual funding gap. So our next step was to evaluate the economic impact of investing at these different funding levels. And from the statewide strategic transportation plan that existed at the time, there was an economic multiplier range of about $1 invested to $4 to $7.80 return on that investment, based on some assumptions. And if that level of investment was made at either of those 3 tiers, what could be the economic benefit to the state of Georgia? And you can see on the low end with system preservation, we realize approximately $150 billion return on investment as a state. The other bookend would be under the universe of needs scenario with approximately a $1 trillion return on investment to Georgia. As we think about job creation and what transportation investment can do on that front, we calculated that approximately 1.7 million job years could be generated with the universe of needs scenario, and thinking that maybe a 5-year period would equate to an actual employee. It could lead to about 340,000 people employed through year 2050 under that scenario. So again, this report came out, was communicated to that Joint Study Commission in 2014, which preceded the Transportation Funding Act. That Transportation Funding Act provided about $1 billion additional investment in transportation. And you can see here, these figures are from GDOT. The blue bars indicate level of investment for the 4 years preceding the Transportation Funding Act. So from 2012 to 2015, and these three categories: routine maintenance, capital maintenance, and bridge replacements. And then you can see the needle-moving impact that TFA had in Georgia with the green bars of years 2016, 17, 18, and 19, and how Georgia has invested in those project categories since that vote. So one potential next step as we're thinking about this is, something more freight focused, perhaps, an opportunity to look at, to dust off the economic drivers and some of the assumptions behind economic output associated with transportation investment, and then capitalizing on a lot of the great work that GDOT, ARC, and other stakeholders have done in the last 5 years that was available at the time to help communicate a message around the benefits that investment can have, specifically investment in freight logistics type projects to the state of Georgia. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. That's what I had.
All right, thank you. Questions? Thank you for bringing that information. I think it's important to recap that, going back to the original study, that the $1 million was needed just to help us maintain the growing infrastructure needs we have in the state. It's calling for more investment of state dollars. Appreciate you bringing that. Also, I'm sure Chelsea has that, so she'll send that out to everyone on the commission too, who have that study. And I just want to again commend Georgia Chamber, the Metro Chamber, Georgia Transportation Alliance, because they've been at the forefront of this conversation going back for many years, having defined studies, and to keep this conversation current and relevant to the policymakers. So, thank you all. We got both of them are represented on our commission here today. Thank you for all you did to get us to where we are today. Yes.
Thanks for bringing back all those pleasant memories. But it's important that we recognize what's already been said. It's $1 billion is more or less the minimum we need. We've identified $3 billion or more, I think it was, as we needed per year. Going forward, if we look for other alternative sources of revenue, not only for roads and bridges, but also for freight, hopefully we can find a solution that would complement both simultaneously. So we don't want to start, I don't want to see us take money away from all the work we did here for either transit or freight. But if we can find some additional sources of revenue that would complement both of those in this at the same time, I think that would be a good goal for us to keep in front of us.
And as we continue to work through the day and after lunch, we hear from Commissioner Murray kind of a recap of what we've heard over the last several months and what that looks like from a dollar perspective and what those gaps are from GDOT's perspective. One of the things we're going to be working to put together over the next month or so is a report from this commission and the work that we've done and some suggestions. So we need to be thinking about HTV mentioned and maybe something we want to consider as a recommendation is doing a comprehensive study from a funding perspective, looking at not only what the need is, but also looking at potential sources of revenue for that. We heard some things from Brad and Israel today about what some other states have done, where money can come from. I think we look at that. I think it's important. other questions?